Hi, I'm going to talk about English of translation and what I learned during this month. Since the time of our cave dweller ancestor, people have been communicating in different ways. Translation has been used by humans for centuries, beginning after the appearance of written literature. The cultures used translation because they wanted to transfer activities, to share some of their knowledge, or in order to conquer the world, to improve agriculture and knowledge about math, to create develop literary works for entertainment, the desire to spread the word and encourage faith, and so on. I think translation is essential for bridging communication gaps, for spreading scientific, technological, and cultural information, and for facilitating business worldwide, since international interaction continues to grow exponentially. Egyptians used translation to share some of their knowledge to slaves. They used two languages, God's language and slavery language. First phase of translation taking place in the Egyptian culture. They believed to improve agriculture and knowledge about math, that the language of God needed to be translated. It began from Hebrew into Arabic. Second phase. Sumerian poem Gilgamesh was translated into Asian language. Buddhist monks who translated Indian document into Chinese. Third phase of translation. When the Greeks were conquered, their works were taken in by Arabic scholars. After the Arabic version were later translated into Latin during the Middle Ages. Fourth phase of translation, religious. Start with the development of religious texts and spiritual theories. One of the first translated was the Old Testament. It was translated into Greek. Now I'm going to talk about some important interpreters. Okay? Gaspar Antonio Chi. He was an interpreter of King Charles V of Spain and an informant for Diego de Landa in reading his Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán. I am Yucatecan teacher. I am from Mérida. Good. And Sacagawea in the expedition of Lewis and Clark was hired as an interpreter and guide. She was the most famous translator of the 18th century. And here I have a book that is talk about of that expedition of Lewis and Clark. It was in 1804, teacher, and this book I use when I teach English in 6th grade, and I like to read this text for my children about her. But I didn't know she was the most famous translator. I didn't know in that century. Well, Alexander Burns, he spoke English, Hindi, and Persian. He became a spy from the British military. Mark Twain, he was a great author of American history. He was sent a translator. He discovered a French translating of his history, the celebrating jumping frog of Calaveras County, and decided to translate the French version back into English. Jorge Luis Borges, he was a famous actor and talented translator. He translated The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde into Argentinian Spanish at the age of 9. And here I have other book about this tale, The Happy Prince. I like to read to my children of 3rd grade. And I didn't know what it's about before, but when I started to teach on elementary school, I could read about the Happy Prince, and I liked it too much, this story. And this is by by Oscar Wilde. Well, Jorge Luis Borges, and we talk about of that. Translation became important, and it was called the Age of Translation. It began with the end of the World War II. Documents were transferred to 4 different languages: German English, French English, German to French, and Italian English. In the 16th century, when teaching Greek to Latin speakers or vice versa, translation was the popular method. Bowen, Madsen, and Hilferty. Models of translating. The linguistic model studies the linguistic resources of the source and target language and the mechanisms available in the target language for overcoming the structural difference between source and targets that appear in translation. The text linguistic model takes into account the various uses of language by the speaker and writers in particular communicative situations. Conventions that obtained for a particular textual category in the target cultures are determined by top-down process in sentences to word, not word, to sentences analysis. The computational model was thought at the time of appearance of machine translation that it would take over the job of all except literary translating, as cultural and context dependent elements were too difficult even for the most capable supercomputer. Today, we speak of computer-assisted translating. The computer is used in computer-assisted translation. It's a tool for the human translator and incorporates terminological lexical assistant, encyclopedic and knowledge organizational assistant, translation strategic assistance, and document management assistance. Psycholinguistic model. Rorschach in 1991 claimed that the division of the translating process into understanding of the source text, transcoding SL into target language, and formulating target text has no ground in actual translating behavior. Interdisciplinary models. It has been found that exact equivalence between L1 and L2 is exceedingly rare. Polysystem theory by Ibn Zohar is mainly directed to evaluating literary translation, as the idea of polysystem posits the existence of a canonized literature and non-canonized literature, which tries to displace the established system by the means of the introduction of translated work. Teaching translation has become increasingly popular in Europe. Teaching future professionals, master courses like philology or applied linguistics have been created as translating and interpreting degrees created in many Spanish and Latin America. Its goal is the use of the language as a tool in a future professional activity. Translation needs to focus on the practical aspects. For interpreters, interpreting skills have to be acquired before entering professional activities. Difficult when translating. Lack of proficiency in the target language, lack of proficiency in the source language, and lack of intercultural competence or sensitivity. Well, translation as a language teaching. This is looked at from the point of view of learning a language in the general foreign language classroom, both at school and at university, not of how to become a professional translator. Advantage of the use of translation in the classroom. Checking on accuracy, awareness of context, and for cognitive psychological reasons. It's important to mention the steps of translation, like preparatory exercises, parallel text, translating L2 to L1, translating L1 to L2, like we did in activities 2 and 3. Process versus product. It is not the product, the final translation, that is important, but the whole process. Not helps the student to analyze process, progress, and particular difficulties together, either one-to-one or in groups, but can also be used as a basis for in a class discussion after the exercise has been completed. The translation class is also the ideal opportunity for students to learn good dictionary skills. The use of dictionaries and other works of reference must be encouraged at all times. I teach the language since 8 years ago. I started with kindergarten and now I teach in elementary school. I use translation because my children haven't taken the language in all grades, and it is difficult for them to understand what I want to explain to them. Almost half of my children come from government schools, and they feel frustrated because they don't understand what I say. But when we are halfway through the course, I try not to translate. I prefer they can understand what I say for themselves. Translation is a useful tool to learn grammar, syntax, and lexis. By studying for grammar, students can reach higher levels of translation, and vice versa. By translating, they acquire more competence in the knowledge of grammatical structures. Translating can't be separated from interpreting. Even when we speak about a written text, the purpose of both is to transfer information from the source text to the target text. It is useful to translate short sentences in order to be able to read a longer paragraph and bend the structure of the single phrase later on. As pointed out above, grammar is the basis of learning a language. A word-for-word back translation enables the student to highlight the relationship between the two languages. Thank you.